I built a snowman with my son, just a snowman, on our lawn. But to Karen, the president of our HOA, it was a violation. She didn't just send warnings, she didn't just trespass. She revved her SUV and drove straight through it. What she didn't know was what lay underneath. Not just snow, but steel, and a tree stump I'd warned the HOA about years ago. She thought she could bully us into obedience, but she ended up with a wrecked SUV, a neighborhood in revolt, and a snowman that refused to fall. This isn't just a story about winter. It's about power, about defiance, and what happens when a bully learns that not everything soft on the outside is weak inside. My name is James, and this is how a snowman helped me take down an HOA tyrant. The whole saga truly began with a lightning-scarred oak stump that refused to die. 3 winters earlier, a summer storm had rolled in from the west, like an angry artillery barrage. The sky turned the color of a fresh bruised wind screamed through the pines, and one single bolt, white-hot and deafening, struck the tallest oak in our front yard. The explosion shook the house so hard that Jack, then 7, dove under the kitchen table screaming for his mother. Clara had been gone 8 months by then, but in that moment, the thunder sounded exactly like her name. When the smoke cleared, the tree stood split down the middle half of it, sheared away as cleanly as if God himself had taken an axe to it. The lower third remained rooted deep, blackened, and utterly defiant. I paid a crew to haul away the fallen crown, but I left the stump. Something about it felt like a memorial. To the tree. To Clara. To everything that gets struck down and still refuses to fall. Every December since that stump vanished beneath a flawless white blanket. Delivery drivers, teenagers racing home, after curfew, and salt truck operators who took corners too fast never saw it until it was too late. After the second fender bender in as many years, I started jamming a 6-foot orange reflective pole straight into its heart the moment the first flakes stuck. The pole had saved at least 3 vehicles I knew of, probably more. No one ever rang my doorbell with cookies or a 6-pack. Instead, the year Karen Stapleton was elected president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association, she mailed me a crisp $50 citation for erecting an unauthorized hazard marker in violation of Aesthetic Conformity Clause 4.2b. I wrote the check, stuck a yellow Post-it on it that read, "Merry Christmas, glad your husband's Lexus still has a front bumper," and mailed it back. She never cashed it. The canceled check now hangs in a cheap black frame on my garage wall, right between my welding certification and a faded photograph of Clara laughing on a pier in Virginia Beach, Jack balanced on her hip like a sleepy koala. My son Jack, 10 years old, freckles across his nose like cinnamon on oatmeal, and convinced he is one growth spurt away from becoming Captain America, never saw the stump as a hazard. To him, it was magic disguised as wood. One week it became a pirate ship's crow's nest, the next a knight's watchtower. And on especially epic afternoons, it served as the perfect launch pad for snowball barrages that could take down imaginary invading hordes at 25 yards. He had named the stump Old Thunder the first winter after the strike, and every year he greeted it like an old friend when the snow finally hid its scars. That particular winter, the snow arrived early and with attitude. It started the first week of December, thick wet flakes that fell straight down and stuck to everything like confectioner's sugar on wedding cake. Jack and I spent an entire Saturday outside, breath fogging in front of us, shovels scraping in rhythmic unison. We cleared the walk, the driveway, even the mailbox path for Mrs. Delgado next door because her hip had been acting up. By the time the sun dipped low and orange behind the bare maples, our gloves were soaked through, cheeks windburned, and noses running like faucets. Jack dropped his shovel, planted his boots wide, and looked up at me with that particular grin, half mischief, half dare that always meant trouble of the best kind. "Dad," he said, voice muffled slightly by the scarf Clara had knitted him the Christmas before she got sick, "we are building the single biggest, most legendary snowman this entire HOA has ever seen. Like record-breaking. Like they'll have to rewrite the bylaws because of us." I opened my mouth to say the responsible thing, "Karen will lose her mind. We'll get another letter. Let's just keep the peace." But the words stuck somewhere behind the lump in my throat. Because in that moment, with snowflakes catching in his eyelashes and the porch light flickering on behind us, he looked so much like Clara it hurt. She had been the one who never let the world's petty rules steal joy from a 10-year-old boy. She would have been out here until midnight packing snow and laughing. So instead I heard myself say, only if we put him right on Old Thunder. Make him taller than their stupid regulations allow. Jack let out a war whoop that echoed down the entire cul-de-sac and scared a flock of starlings into the darkening sky. We worked until our fingers went numb and the streetlights buzzed to life. The base alone was wider than our pickup's tire and heavier than sin. I muscled it up onto the stump where it settled with a deep, satisfying crunch perfectly anchored by the hidden roots below. From the garage, I dragged out everything I'd been saving for someday scrap rebar steel mesh from an old fence job. Even the bent mower blade that had survived 3 seasons of Bermuda grass and one unfortunate encounter with a sprinkler head. Jack watched eyes saucer round as I twisted the metal into an invisible skeleton deep inside the snow. It's not cheating, I told him, winking through the sting of cold on my cheeks. It's structural integrity. Sarge is going to stand until spring, whether Karen likes it or not. Jack's response was immediate and perfect. We're building a snowmech, Dad. A full-on frost giant with a titanium spine and zero respect for HOA presidents. By the time we finished, the temperature had plummeted and the sky was a hard indigo bowl of stars. We gave our creation coal eyes, scavenged from last summer's barbecue briquettes, a crimson scarf that had once been part of my army dress blues, and 2 black bottle caps that caught the streetlight like polished obsidian. Carrots were frozen solid in the crisper, so Jack insisted on a slightly sad banana we found at the bottom of the fruit bowl. It curved upward in a permanent sarcastic smirk. Under the sodium orange glow of the street lamp, our frost giant stood at least 7 feet tall, maybe 7.5 if you counted the patrol cap Jack jammed on at a jaunty angle. His shadow stretched clear across the cul-de-sac and halfway up the Hendersons' garage door. There was something undeniably watchful about him, scarf fluttering like a banner bottle cap eyes, reflecting passing headlights posture straighter and prouder than any snowman had a right to be. Jack stepped back, mittens on his hips, surveying our masterpiece like a general reviewing troops. What do we call him? I asked, voice low, with something that felt suspiciously like awe. Jack didn't even blink. Sarge, he declared, because he looks like he's already been through hell and is daring the world to try again. I laughed so hard my ribs ached, and the cold burned all the way to my lungs. Sarge it was. Later, after Jack had finally crashed, still fully dressed, except for boots sprawled across his bed, clutching a plastic army man, I poured myself a mug of cocoa spiked with a generous finger of bourbon and settled by the front window. Outside, the snow continued its silent assault, each flake catching the streetlight for a heartbeat before vanishing into the growing drifts. And there stood Sarge, motionless, unapologetic, a sentinel forged from childhood joy and adult spite. I raised my mug in a quiet salute. Welcome to the watch, soldier. Little did I know the enemy was already measuring angles in the dark. The first official declaration of war arrived at 7:12 the next morning, slid into our mailbox like a perfumed threat. No envelope, no stamp, just one sheet of heavy ivory cardstock, folded with surgical precision. The letterhead was embossed in gold foil, Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. The text was typed in cold perfect 12-point Times New Roman, the font of bureaucrats and divorce lawyers. Notice of violation. Regulation 7.14C. Seasonal decorations exceeding 48 inches in vertical height require written pre-approval from the board. Your unauthorized structure currently measures approximately 84-87 inches depending on drift. Immediate removal is required within 48 hours. Non-compliance will trigger daily fines of $50 and possible referral to the Compliance Subcommittee. Karen Stapleton, President, Maple Ridge, HOA. I read it 3 times, steam from my coffee curling around the words like angry ghosts. Then I laughed so hard, the mug nearly slipped from my frozen fingers. Jack came skidding into the kitchen in sock feet hair sticking up like he'd been electrocuted. What's so funny? I handed him the letter. He read it slowly, lips moving, then looked up with the pure, unfiltered outrage only a 10-year-old can muster. She measured him. His voice cracked on the last word. At night, in the snow, with a tape measure. Woman's got commitment, I said, wiping my eyes. And a headlamp, apparently. Jack marched straight to the front window, pressed both palms and his nose to the glass, and bellowed loud enough to rattle the panes. Sarge is taller than your soul, Karen. Mrs. Delgado across the street peeked through her curtains and gave us a thumbs up. I pinned the notice to the refrigerator with the bald eagle magnet right next to Jack's latest report card. 3 A's, 1 B- in penmanship, and a teacher comment that read Jack has strong opinions and stronger volume. Jack immediately added his own artwork, a crayon masterpiece of Sarge stomping on a tiny navy blue SUV, while Karen fled in fuzzy pink slippers, tears streaming. Underneath in purple marker, property of the United States of Jack and Sarge. Word travels faster than salt trucks in Maple Ridge. By noon the next day, fresh snow had fallen again, wet, heavy, perfect for packing, and the neighborhood kids materialized like they'd been summoned by some ancient snowball pact. They came with phones raised, scarves flapping, parents trailing behind, pretending they weren't supervising. Someone hung an old Army patrol cap on Sarge's head at a rakish angle. Another kid produced a second scarf, bright Gryffindor red, and wrapped it like a victory sash. Jack took a fat black Sharpie and drew a row of campaign ribbons across the snowy chest, tiny hearts for bravery, lightning bolts for surviving Karen. Every selfie, every whoop, every snowball launched from behind Sarge's broad back felt like a middle finger wrapped in mittens. And Karen was watching. I caught her first on Tuesday afternoon. I was out salting the walk, the chemical crystals hissing against the ice, when her navy blue Lincoln Navigator eased past the cul-de-sac at exactly 8 miles per hour. Engine idling, wipers flicking lazily, heat shimmering off the hood. She didn't wave, didn't slow, just stared straight ahead at Sarge like he was a personal insult carved in ice. 5 full minutes she sat there, a dark silhouette behind tinted glass, breath fogging the windshield in slow, deliberate puffs. Then the SUV reversed with mechanical grace and vanished around the corner. That evening, after the streetlights buzzed on and the temperature dropped hard enough to make the snow squeak underfoot, I found the evidence, a perfect circle of boot prints around Sarge. Narrow, expensive tread, Italian leather, probably the kind that costs more per square inch than my mortgage payment. The prints were pressed deep as if their owner had stood in one spot for a long time, slowly pivoting, studying every angle. One set of prints stopped directly in front of Sarge's banana nose, close enough that whoever it was could have touched him. Jack crouched beside the track's flashlight beam, cutting through the dark. "Recon mission," he whispered, deadly serious. "She's casing the joint." I knelt next to him, the cold seeping through my jeans. "Let her case," I said. "She still doesn't get it." "Get what?" I pointed at the ground beneath Sarge's base, where the snow had been packed so tight it gleamed like marble. "He's not just standing on Old Thunder, buddy. He is Old Thunder. Roots run 20 feet in every direction. You'd need a backhoe and a court order to move him now." Jack's grin could have lit the whole block. "So basically, we built a fortress and called it a Snowman." "Exactly." We high-fived, mittens smacking together with a muffled thwop that echoed down the empty street. Inside, I poured 2 mugs of cocoa, extra marshmallows for morale, and we sat at the kitchen table, sketching battle plans on the back of Karen's violation notice. Jack wanted to add a Carrot machine gun turret. I suggested reinforcing the midsection with the old satellite dish I'd been meaning to recycle. We settled on both. Later, long after Jack was asleep, dreaming of frost giants and victory parades, I stood at the window again. The street was silent, except for the soft creak of ice expanding in the gutters. Sarge stood beneath the street lamp, like a lone sentry, on night watch, scarf fluttering in the faint breeze, bottle cap eyes reflecting the moon in twin silver coins. I pressed my palm to the cold glass and felt the house settle around me, solid and warm and ours. Karen could measure all she wanted. She could circle and glare, and write her little letters until her manicured fingers bled ink. But some things, some people, some sons, some stubborn old oaks, and one very particular 7-foot frost giant simply refused to yield. And winter had only just begun. 2 days after the first notice, exactly on the morning of December 10th, a date I now remember the way soldiers remember the day they first heard incoming rounds, the second letter arrived. This one came in an actual envelope, heavy linen stock, hand-delivered while Jack and I were eating breakfast. I heard the soft slap of paper against the welcome mat, the faint crunch of expensive boots retreating down the salted steps, and I knew before I even opened the door. The envelope was sealed with a gold foil sticker shaped like the Maple Ridge logo, a stylized maple leaf wearing a crown because of course it was. Inside, the tone had escalated from polite hostility to barely veiled fury. Second notice. Escalated. Dear Mr. James Carter, despite the previous directive issued on December 8th, the unauthorized seasonal structure on your property remains in place. Current height now exceeds 92 inches, including recent additions of non-regulation scarves and headwear. Furthermore, close inspection has revealed the presence of non-decorative internal materials, metal rebar mesh, and what appears to be a lawnmower blade, creating an unapproved load-bearing construct that may constitute a liability hazard. Effective immediately, you are assessed a $150 fine, accruing weekly until full removal and restoration of the lawn to pre-storm condition. Failure to comply by December 14th will result in referral to the Compliance Subcommittee and potential legal remediation through the association's retained counsel. This is your final courtesy notification. Sincerely, Karen Stapleton, President, Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. I read it aloud at the table. Jack's spoon froze halfway to his mouth, Cocoa Puffs bobbing like tiny brown life rafts. She called Sarge a liability hazard, he whispered, as if the words themselves were cursed. She called him a lot of things, I said, folding the letter with deliberate slowness. None of them friendly. Jack's eyes narrowed. She's scared of him. Terrified, I agreed. Because the phrase that had snagged in my brain like barbed wire was non-decorative internal materials. Karen hadn't just measured from the street this time. She had come close enough to see the faint glint of rebar beneath the fresh powder we'd packed on yesterday. She had stood there in her designer coat, breath-fogging phone flashlight, cutting through the dark, cataloging every sin like a general mapping enemy fortifications. I turned to the window. Sarge stood proud under a thin new dusting of snow scarves, fluttering like regimental colors, banana nose curved in that permanent smirk. Sunlight caught the bottle cap eyes and threw twin sparks across the yard. He looked, there's no other word for it, heroic. Jack was already sketching again. This time, Sarge wore a cape made of caution tape and carried a shield shaped like Karen's violation notice. Do we have to take him down? He asked, voice small for the first time. I crouched, so we were eye level. Listen to me, buddy. Sarge is staying right where he is until the spring thaw personally asks him to leave. And even then, I'm pretty sure he'll tell spring to get lost. Jack's grin came back full force. Attaboy, Dad. That night, the temperature plummeted to 12 degrees. The kind of cold that makes your teeth ache and turns every breath into a dragon plume. I waited until Jack was asleep, then pulled on every layer I owned. Carhartt bibs, 2 hoodies, the balaclava Clara bought me the year we tried ice fishing and swore we'd never do it again. I carried a headlamp, a cordless drill with a fresh battery, a 5-gallon bucket of quick-set epoxy, and every remaining length of rebar in the garage. The plan wasn't a weapon, never that, but I was done pretending Sarge was fragile. Working by the red glow of the headlamp so I wouldn't wake the street, I drilled fresh holes straight through the packed snow and into the heart of Old Thunder. Each length of rebar slid home with a satisfying metallic thunk, like bolts sliding into a rifle. I poured epoxy into every void, watching it foam and harden, almost instantly in the cold. Then I wove steel mesh across the shoulders and chest, bending it with gloved hands until it disappeared beneath a final thick layer of snow Jack and I would pack on in the morning. When I stepped back, sweat freezing on my eyebrows, Sarge looked exactly the same from the street, cheerful, ridiculous, harmless. But inside he was now a fortress wrapped in a joke. As I packed up my tools, headlights swept across the yard slow, deliberate, familiar. Karen's navigator again. This time she didn't even pretend to drive past. She stopped directly in front of the house, engine idling high beams, cutting through the dark like searchlights. For 30 full seconds, the light bathed Sarge in harsh white, turning every snow crystal into diamond dust. I stood in the open garage doorway, arms crossed, and stared straight into the glare. The high beams flicked off. The SUV reversed tires crunching and disappeared. Message received on both sides. Back inside, I poured a finger of bourbon, no cocoa this time, and opened the red folder I kept in the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside were 5 years of Karen's greatest hits, the certified letter about the window AC unit during a heat index of 108 degrees, the grass height citation measured to the quarter inch, the passive-aggressive forum posts about certain residents who believe rules are optional. I added the new letter hole punched it with satisfying violence and slid it behind its predecessors. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the live feed from the 4 security cameras I'd installed after the 3rd anonymous concern about my truck parked overnight. One camera pointed directly at Sarge. I rewound to 2:14 a.m. the previous night. There she was. Karen bundled in a long camel coat, fur-lined hood-up flashlight beam, dancing across Sarge's midsection. She circled him slowly, measuring tape extended like a snake's tongue. At one point, she stopped, tilted her head, and I swear this is true, smiled. A small, private, triumphant smile, as if she'd finally found the weakness she'd been hunting for. She looked straight up at the garage camera, raised one gloved hand, and waved. A deliberate, mocking little finger wiggle. Then she walked away, boots leaving perfect crescents in the snow. I replayed it 3 times, heart hammering against my ribs like incoming mortar rounds. This wasn't about decorations anymore. This was personal. And for the first time since Clara died, I felt something hotter than grief ignite in my chest. Karen thought she was baiting a tired, single dad who just wanted to be left alone. She had no idea she'd poked a soldier who'd spent years learning exactly how to fortify a position and how to make it look harmless until it was too late. I closed the laptop, drained the bourbon, and looked out at Sarge standing watch under the streetlight. Sleep could wait. Tomorrow we'd add the satellite dish. And the night after that, well, winter was long, and Sarge had only just begun to fight. The Thursday night HOA meeting was held in the clubhouse that smelled perpetually of lemon disinfectant, burnt coffee, and the quiet desperation of people who had nothing better to do at 7 o'clock on a school night. I hadn't set foot in that building in nearly 2 years. Not since they tried to pass the 2 matching porch chairs, only rule that would have outlawed the Adirondack Clara painted bright turquoise the summer before she got sick. Tonight, though, I walked through those glass doors like I was crossing a line I'd been daring someone to draw for half a decade. Jack insisted on coming. He wore his Team Sarge hoodie, the one Eli's older sister had screen printed after the first selfies went viral in the 4th grade group chat, and carried a spiral notebook labeled Top Secret Battle Plans in red marker. He marched beside me like a tiny adjutant, boots clomping on the tile chin high. The room was already half full. Folding chairs in perfect rows, fluorescent lights humming overhead, a long table at the front, draped in white plastic like a cheap wedding. Karen sat dead center in her winter white blazer, lips painted the exact shade of arterial blood spine so straight it looked painful. The rest of the board flanked her like nervous courtiers. Howard with his perpetual cardigan, Rosa the new one barely 30 and already exhausted, and 2 others whose names I never bothered to learn because they only spoke when Karen told them to breathe. I took a seat in the back row, Jack on my left, an empty chair on my right that nobody dared fill. The air smelled like burnt Folgers and barely contained rage. Karen began with the usual pageant treasurer's report, snowplow contract renewal, someone's dog pooping on the common area again. Every word delivered in that practiced, syrupy voice that made you want to check your blood sugar. Then she cleared her throat the way people do when they're about to drop a bomb and pretend it's confetti. I'd like to bring forward a special agenda item, she announced, sliding a single glossy photograph across the table. It was Sarge printed in cruel high definition, the satellite dish now clearly visible beneath the scarf like a chest plate. A resident has erected an unauthorized reinforced seasonal structure exceeding 96 inches in height, incorporating prohibited metal components, and positioned directly atop a previously cited hazard stump. This is no longer decoration. It is a deliberate safety risk and an aesthetic affront to the entire community. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. 20 heads swiveled in perfect synchronization. Jack leaned over and whispered loud enough for the row in front of us to hear. She said affront. That's a fancy word for butthurt. A couple people choked on their coffee. Karen's eyes locked on me, cold and glittering. Would the resident in question care to explain himself? I raised my hand like a kid asking to go to the bathroom, slow and deliberate. Since you're talking about my front yard, yeah, I've got a couple questions. Karen's smile could have frozen lava. Proceed, Mr. Carter. Has anyone at all been injured by the Snowman? Silence. Any property damage? Any insurance claims? Any child traumatized by a rogue banana nose? A few muffled laughs rippled through the back rows. Karen's jaw twitched. Safety issues do not wait for tragedy, Mr. Carter. Funny, I said, standing now, because I seem to remember your nephew doing donuts in the cul-de-sac last 4th of July on his dirt bike. Nearly took out Mrs. Delgado's mailbox and my son. That was a safety issue. Didn't see a violation notice for that. Gasps. Someone dropped a pen. Or your husband's company van parked on the street for 4 days straight last August. Commercial vehicles prohibited right. Funny how some rules bend when it's family. Howard shifted uncomfortably. Rosa's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. This is not about vendettas, Karen snapped, voice cracking like thin ice. No, I said, stepping into the aisle, boots echoing on the tile. This is about selective enforcement. This is about a president who trespasses on private property with a tape measure at 2 in the morning, who fines a widower for a window AC unit during a heat advisory because, God forbid, someone sees a little white plastic from the street. This is about a woman who thinks power comes from a clipboard and a printer, not from neighbors treating each other like human beings. I looked straight at the board. I have 5 years of letters, photos, and now video of your president circling my yard like a shark. If this board wants to fine me for a snowman that saved more bumpers than your entire hazard marker budget, go ahead. I'll take it to the city, to the news, to every homeowner who's ever been afraid to plant tomatoes because Karen might measure them. And I'll bring receipts. I pulled my phone out, thumb hovering over play. Want to watch her wave at my security camera at 2:14 a.m. Happy to project it right up there on the screen. Rosa leaned forward. I'd like to see that footage before any vote. Howard nodded slowly. Seconded. Karen's face went the color of spoiled milk. She slammed her folder shut so hard the table jumped. We'll table this item, she hissed, moving on. But the damage was done. People were whispering, phones glowing under chairs, glances darting between me and the suddenly very small woman at the front. A guy I'd never spoken to in 5 years gave me a subtle fist bump as I sat back down. Jack looked up at me, eyes shining like I'd just won the Super Bowl. You crushed it, Dad, he whispered. I ruffled his hair and felt something loosen in my chest I hadn't realized was knotted. Outside, the temperature had dropped again, wind whipping loose snow into tiny tornadoes across the parking lot. Jack and I walked home under a sky so clear the stars looked close enough to touch. Sarge was waiting for us, scarves snapping like battle flags, satellite dish chest plate catching the moonlight in a dull metallic gleam. Jack saluted him. I did too, because for the first time in years, the frost giant wasn't the only one standing tall. And somewhere across the cul-de-sac behind curtains that suddenly felt a lot thinner, Karen was learning what it felt like when the ground shifted under her perfectly manicured boots. Winter was just getting started, and we were ready. Karen Stapleton had not always been the self-crowned empress of Maple Ridge. 5 years ago, when she and her husband Mark first moved in, she was simply the new neighbor with the glossy red grill, the matching patio set that probably cost more than my truck, and a smile that still had a few watts left in it. She brought homemade oatmeal raisin cookies to the welcome barbecue, slightly overbaked, but the gesture counted. She asked polite questions about Jack's school, complimented Clara's wildflower garden, and even laughed when Jack tried to sell her a half-melted popsicle for $1. The mask slipped slowly. It started with small, almost forgivable things, a handwritten note on my windshield, because my trash bins were visible for 37 minutes past 8 a.m. pickup. A comment at the community yard sale that my garage door looked a little war-weary. I shrugged it off. Life is too short to feud over recycling schedules. But Karen doesn't collect opinions the way normal people do. She stockpiles them like ammunition. Once, she got herself elected to the board campaign fueled by free cupcakes from the expensive bakery downtown and glossy flyers that somehow appeared in every mailbox. Overnight, the transformation was swift and surgical. My lawn was suddenly inconsistent with curb appeal standards if it dared grow a quarter-inch past regulation. Jack's portable soccer goal became a visual obstruction and tripping hazard. When I repainted the shed, the exact same neutral tan that was on the approved color palette, she flagged it because I had used the name Desert Clay instead of Sandy Dust. Same hex code, different marketing. She demanded a full repaint anyway. The board rubber stamped her every time. Then came the summer of the air conditioner war. Our central unit died during a brutal heat wave, 108 degrees in the shade, humidity thick enough to chew. Jack was 8 cheeks flushed, tossing and turning in a bedroom that felt like the inside of a pizza oven. I dragged the old window unit out of the garage, ugly, loud, but functional, and wedged it into his bedroom window. It stuck out 8 inches and rattled like a diesel truck, but it dropped the room to a bearable 78 degrees. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived. Immediate violation. Unauthorized window-mounted appliance visible from the street. Daily fines begin accruing at midnight. Sent during an official heat advisory. No empathy, no exception, no humanity. Just rules. I took the unit down at 11:47 p.m. Not because I cared about the fine, but because Jack started crying that the HOA was going to take our house away. 8 years old and terrified of a homeowners association. Let that one sit in your stomach for a minute. I kept every letter after that, every passive-aggressive forum post. Certain residents seem to believe regulations are merely suggestions. Every photo of her crouching in my grass with a ruler like a demented groundskeeper. The red folder in my desk drawer grew fat and heavy, a paper testament to 5 years of quiet harassment. I wasn't the only target, just the one who refused to bow. Mr. Elkins, the retired history teacher on Birch Lane, got fined $200 for 5 tomato plants in raised beds, no agricultural activity permitted. The Nguyens received 3 separate warnings about their wind chimes being audibly disruptive. You could barely hear them over the sound of Karen's own fountain. Julia on Alder Lane put up an inflatable reindeer for her son's 7th birthday, not Christmas, just a random Tuesday in July because the kid loved reindeer. Karen had it cited for excessive visual clutter within 6 hours. She ruled by fear and photocopies. And the reason she hated me, most simple. I never apologized. Never attended her wine and brie mixers. Never pretended her opinion mattered more than my son's laughter, or the way the wildflowers came back every spring in Clara's garden, even though Karen kept voting to rip them out for uniformity. Independence in Karen's world was the ultimate sin. So when she came for Sarge, it wasn't about a snowman. It was the final battle in a 5-year siege. Only this time she had miscalculated in the worst possible way. She thought she was attacking a cute temporary lawn ornament built by a grieving dad and a 10-year-old with a hero complex. She had no idea she was declaring war on a fortress disguised as a joke anchored to the same lightning-scarred stump she once tried to find me for marking, reinforced with every ounce of stubbornness I'd stored up since the day I carried Clara's casket. That night after the meeting, where her own board flinched at the mention of my footage, I sat in the garage long after Jack was asleep. The overhead fluorescents buzzed, casting hard shadows across the concrete. I opened the red folder one last time and spread its contents across the workbench like evidence at a war crimes trial. Then I did something I hadn't done since Kandahar. I planned. Not revenge, never that. Just consequences. I pulled every remaining piece of heavy scrap from the rafters, the cracked satellite dish, 2 discarded brake rotors from the Tacoma I'd parted out last spring, the rusted lawnmower deck that weighed a solid 80 pounds. I laid them out like armor plates. Tomorrow, the blizzard was coming, 40-mile-an-hour winds, whiteout conditions, sub-zero temps. The forecast scrolled across my phone. In angry red banners, high impact, winter storm. Do not travel. Perfect. I looked at the security camera monitor. Sarge stood alone in the dark scarves, whipping banana nose, frozen in that eternal smirk. Hold the line, soldier, I whispered. Because Karen wasn't done. And neither were we. Outside, the first fat flakes of the coming apocalypse began to fall lazy and silent, already erasing the footprints she'd left the night before. By morning, the world would be white and clean and merciless. And Sarge would be ready. The night before the blizzard, the garage glowed like a forward operating base on red alert. Jack and I stood shoulder to shoulder under the harsh fluorescent lights, both of us bundled so thick we looked like mismatched marshmallows. The radio in the corner crackled with the National Weather Service repeating the same 4 words on loop: life-threatening wind chill. Outside, the wind had already begun its low, hungry moan through the eaves, rattling the gutters like distant artillery. Jack's eyes were huge behind the fog of his breath. This is the big one, isn't it? Bigger than last year, I said, dragging the last tarp off the metal pile. They're calling it a bomb cyclone. 45-mile-an-hour gusts, 2 feet of snow, -20 wind chill. Roads will be gone by dawn. Jack nodded solemnly, the way only a 10-year-old who has watched too many war documentaries can. Then Sarge needs full battle rattle. We gave him exactly that. First came the spine, a 6-foot length of 1-inch galvanized pipe I'd saved from a commercial job 2 years ago. I drilled straight through the packed snow and into Old Thunder's heartwood until the pipe seeded with a dull metallic thunk that echoed in my bones. Jack held it perfectly vertical while I tightened 4 stainless bolts the size of railroad spikes. The pipe disappeared completely under fresh powder, but it turned Sarge from a snowman into a flagpole anchored in bedrock. Next, the rib cage. We wove heavy steel mesh in overlapping X patterns across his shoulders and torso, bending it cold with gloved hands, and a 4-pound sledge. Every strike rang out like church bells in the frozen air. Jack fed me zip ties thick enough to moor a boat. I cinched them until the mesh bit deep and vanished beneath another thick layer of snow we sculpted smooth with mittens and pure spite. The lawnmower deck, 80 pounds of rusted iron, went into the base like a buried landmine. Jack and I muscled it up together, grunting and laughing when it almost took my toe off. We wedged it directly against the stump's root flare, then packed snow around it until the ground looked innocent again. Jack disappeared into the scrap bin and came back dragging 2 brake rotors like oversized medals. "These go right here," he declared, slapping Sarge's midsection. "Iron Man plating." We nestled them side by side, scarf draped over the top, so only a faint metallic glint showed when the light hit just right. Last came the pièce de résistance, the cracked 16-inch satellite dish I'd rescued from a curb in 2019. I bent the mounting arm until it curved forward like a Roman breastplate, then buried it beneath the scarves. From 10 feet away, it simply looked like Sarge had puffed his chest out in pride. Up close, it was a 70-pound steel shield waiting for impact. We worked past 10 o'clock past 11, past the point where our fingers went numb, and came back to life again. The garage door stood open to the night so we could keep packing fresh snow the instant the wind delivered it. Every scoop we added felt like another layer of armor, another quiet promise you will not fall. At one point, Jack paused headlamp beam cutting through swirling flakes and looked up at me with absolute seriousness. "Dad, is this too much?" I knelt in the snow so we were eye to eye, the wind howling around us like a living thing. "Jack, listen. There is no such thing as too much when you're defending something that matters. Sarge isn't just a snowman anymore. He's every time someone tried to make us smaller than we are. He's every letter, every fine, every night I couldn't sleep because I was afraid the next knock on the door would be about you. He's your mom's laugh in the middle of a snowstorm. He's us." Jack's eyes welled up, but he blinked hard and nodded once, sharp soldierly. "Then he needs a shield," he said. I handed him the bent coat hanger Rosa had dropped off earlier. Together we shaped it into a crude arm and fixed it so Sarge's right mitten appeared to be holding a rectangular chunk of plywood we painted with leftover deck stain. A tiny white sign that read in Jack's careful block letters, "Maple Ridge, stand tall, or don't stand at all." When we finally stepped back sometime after midnight, the transformation was complete. From the street, he still looked like the world's most patriotic snowman scarves, whipping banana nose crooked in that eternal smirk, bottle cap eyes, reflecting the garage floodlight in twin silver coins. But if you knew where to look, and only if you knew you could see the subtle forward lean of a warrior bracing for impact, the faint outline of steel beneath the snow, the way the entire structure now seemed rooted to the planet itself. Jack tugged his scarf up over his nose and grinned through the knit. "People are going to think we're insane." "They already do," I said. He laughed, the sound bright and sharp against the roar of the coming storm, and we high-fived with mittens that left a perfect puff of snow in the air between us. Inside, we peeled off layers in the mudroom, leaving a small mountain of wet outerwear and a trail of snowy footprints that would infuriate Karen if she ever saw them. Jack fell asleep on the couch before I even finished the hot chocolate, still clutching the plastic army man he'd carried all night like a talisman. I carried him to bed, tucked him in, and stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to the wind scream across the roof. Then I went to the living room window and looked out. The first bands of the blizzard were already here. Snow whipped sideways in sheets thick enough to swallow headlights whole. The street lamp flickered once, twice, then steadied, throwing a cone of orange light that barely reached the edge of the yard. And there, in the middle of the maelstrom, Sarge stood motionless, an icy colossus, daring the storm to do its worst. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass and whispered the words I hadn't said aloud since Clara's funeral. "We've got this." Then I poured one last finger of bourbon, raised it toward the window, and toasted the frost giant keeping watch over my son's dreams. Tomorrow the world would turn white and savage. Tomorrow Karen would make her move. But tonight we had built something unbreakable. And the storm could come. The blizzard hit at 12:07 a.m., like the sky cracked open and decided to bury us alive. I woke to the house, groaning in the wind, roof trusses creaking, windows rattling in their frames, the old oak out back thrashing like it was trying to tear itself free and run. The power flickered twice, then held bathing the bedroom in the sickly yellow glow of the emergency nightlight Jack still refused to admit he needed. I pulled on every layer I owned and padded downstairs in socks thick enough to muffle my steps. The security monitor on the kitchen counter showed all 4 cameras still alive, feeds jittering in the gale. Camera 1 front yard was almost useless, a white vortex where the street used to be. But in the center of the chaos stood Sarge, perfectly framed, lit by the lone street lamp that refused to die. Snow blasted sideways across his chest in horizontal sheets, yet he didn't sway. Not an inch. The satellite dish shield caught the light in brief metallic flashes, like a knight flashing steel in the middle of a cavalry charge. Jack appeared at the top of the stairs in dinosaur pajamas and my old Army PT hoodie that hung to his knees, hair sticking up in every direction. "Is he still there?" he whispered, voice small against the roar outside. "Go look," I said, nodding at the monitor. He scrambled down, pressed his face to the screen, and let out a reverent, "Whoa." The street lamp had iced over, turning its glow into a soft amber halo. Sarge stood inside that halo like a ghost carved from diamond dust scarves, frozen stiff and pointing straight east, the little plywood shield on his arm rattling but holding fast. "He looks like he's glowing," Jack breathed. "That's what happens when you refuse to fall," I told him. We pulled 2 kitchen chairs up to the monitor and sat there like it was Christmas Eve, watching the storm try and fail to move our frost giant. The wind howled at 60-mile-an-hour gusts. The anemometer on the roof screamed like a jet engine, yet Sarge stood rooted to the planet, a single unmoving point in a world gone insane. At 2:14 a.m., exactly, headlights cut through the whiteout. 2 pale swords slicing the darkness from the north end of the cul-de-sac. The feed glitched, corrected, and there she was. Karen's navy blue Lincoln Navigator crawling forward at walking speed, tires crunching over the fresh powder like bones. She stopped dead center in front of our house, engine idling, exhaust plume whipping sideways, and vanishing instantly. Jack's hand found mine and squeezed. "What is she doing?" he whispered. I didn't answer. Couldn't. My pulse hammered in my ears louder than the wind. The driver's side window descended with a mechanical whine barely audible over the storm. A gloved hand emerged, holding a phone. The screen's blue-white glow lit Karen's face for 3 full seconds, pale, tight eyes, wide and unblinking. She stared straight at Sarge. Then at the camera she knew was watching. Then back at Sarge. 30 seconds, a full minute. 3 minutes of nothing but wind and headlights, and the low growl of a V8 that had no business being out here. Jack's grip turned painful. "Dad." "I see it." Finally, the window rose. The SUV sat another 30 seconds rocking gently in the gusts. Then it reversed slow, deliberate, until the taillights disappeared into the white curtain. She never got out. She never blinked. She just looked, measured, planned. I rewound the footage twice, heart hammering so hard I felt it in my teeth. Karen hadn't come to threaten or gloat. She'd come to memorize the angle, the distance, the exact line from the top of the hill to the base of our frost giant. She was calculating impact. Jack's voice was barely a breath. "She's going to try to knock him down." I pulled him close, felt his small body trembling against mine. Not from cold, but from the same fury I'd been carrying for 5 years. "Let her try," I said. Because beneath that smiling face of snow and scarves and crooked banana nose was 80 pounds of lawnmower deck, 2 brake rotors, a satellite shield, and a spine of galvanized pipe bolted into a stump that had survived lightning, drought, and every bureaucratic tantrum Karen could throw. Sarge wasn't just reinforced. He was vengeance, wearing a festive scarf. We stayed at the monitor until the sky outside turned the color of dishwater and the wind finally began to ease. At some point, Jack fell asleep against my shoulder breath, warm on my neck. I carried him to bed, tucked the blankets tight, and stood in the hallway listening to the storm spend itself against the house. Before I went back downstairs, I stopped at the window one last time. The blizzard had done its worst. 2 feet of fresh powder drifts sculpted into knife-edged waves, every footprint from the night before erased like they'd never existed. And in the center of it all, untouched, unbowed, stood Commander Sarge, scarves frozen into wings, shield arm raised in eternal salute, banana nose curved in a grin that said, "Bring it." I rested my forehead against the freezing glass and whispered the promise I'd made to Clara the night she asked me to keep Jack's world big enough for wonder. "Not tonight, baby, not ever." Then I poured the last of the bourbon, raised the glass to the frost giant, keeping watch, and waited for morning. Because somewhere out there in the white silence, Karen was warming up her engine. And when she came, she was going to learn what happens when you drive 2 tons of entitlement straight into 5 winters worth of quiet, furious, unbreakable defiance. Let it snow. Morning after the blizzard broke, cold, bright, and viciously beautiful. The world had been scrubbed clean and sharpened to a blade. Every tree branch wore a sleeve of ice thick enough to ring like glass when the wind touched it. The streets were gone, only smooth white plains broken by the occasional buried mailbox or half-swallowed SUV. The sun hung low and merciless, turning every surface into a mirror that hurt to look at directly. I was on my 3rd cup of coffee, standing at the kitchen window in nothing but long johns and wool socks, when the security monitor pinged, motion at 8:47 a.m. exactly. Karen's Lincoln Navigator appeared at the top of the hill like a shark fin cutting through powder. She paused there for a full 10 seconds, engine idling exhaust, curling up in lazy spirals that the wind immediately shredded. From the overhead camera angle, she looked tiny against the vast white, but I could feel the intent rolling off the screen in waves. Jack came thundering downstairs, still in dinosaur pajamas, hair doing its best impression of a dandelion. Is it her? It's her. We watched in perfect silence as the SUV eased forward, tires hissing over the packed snow, gathering speed with every yard. 20 miles an hour, 30, 35. The hill gave her gravity as an accomplice. She wasn't turning. She wasn't braking. She was aiming. I saw the exact moment she committed a tiny jerk of the steering wheel left, then a hard correction, right lining the grill up dead center on Sarge, like she was threading a needle with 2 tons of steel and rage. Jack's hand found mine again. His fingers were ice. Daddy. Time slowed to syrup. The Navigator crossed the invisible property line, front tires bumping up over the buried curb with a soft whump that the microphone picked up clear as a gunshot. Snow exploded outward in twin rooster tails. The hood ornament, some chrome knight on horseback, flashed once in the sun and then disappeared behind a wall of white. 10 feet. 5. Impact. The sound was not a crunch. It was a detonation. A deep, metallic boom that rolled down the block like a bowling ball made of thunder. The entire house shook. Coffee sloshed over the rim of my mug and burned a stripe across my wrist, but I didn't feel it. On screen, the Lincoln's front end folded like cheap origami. Hood buckled skyward in a perfect V. Steam erupted from the radiator in a violent white plume. Both airbags deployed with muffled bangs that looked almost gentle compared to the carnage outside. The windshield spiderwebbed from corner to corner in a lightning bolt of shattered safety glass. And Sarge never moved. Not 1 inch. There was a fresh dent, the size of a dinner plate, in his midsection, where the satellite dish had taken the brunt, and one scarf had been ripped clean off and flung 20 feet into the Nguyen's yard like a surrender flag. But the frost giant stood exactly where he'd been planted, banana nose still smirking, shield arm still raised in defiant salute. The Navigator, meanwhile, had recoiled like it had struck a bridge abutment. It sat crooked in my yard, front wheels buried to the hubs, steam hissing hazard lights blinking forlornly in the silence that followed. Jack let out a sound halfway between a war whoop and a sob. She hit him. She actually hit him, and he didn't even blink. I was already moving, pulling on boots, grabbing my phone, hitting record before I even reached the front door. Stay here, I told him. No way. He was right behind me, boots half-laced, cheeks flushed crimson with cold and victory. By the time we stepped outside, half the neighborhood was emerging like survivors from bunkers. Garage doors rattled up, front doors cracked open. People stood on porches in bathrobes and bunny slippers, breath-pluming phones raised. Someone started slow clapping. Someone else whistled the opening bars of Sweet Caroline, for reasons no one would ever explain. Karen was still behind the wheel hands, frozen at 10 and 2, staring through the cracked windshield like she'd just discovered gravity was optional. The deflated airbag draped across her chest like a sad white flag. A thin line of blood traced from her hairline, where her head had kissed the visor. I approached, slow boots, crunching phone held high and recording in glorious 4K. "You okay in there, Madam President?" I called, voice calm enough to cut glass. Her window was cracked 6 inches. Cold poured in, heat poured out. It didn't move, she whispered, as if saying it aloud might make it less true. Nope. You booby-trapped it. Built a snowman on my own property, I corrected. You're the one who decided to play demolition derby at 40 miles an hour on an icy road. In a residential neighborhood. During a blizzard recovery. From the sidewalk, Rosa appeared phone up live streaming to the neighborhood Facebook group I hadn't even known existed until that moment. Is she hurt? Rosa asked, not sounding particularly concerned. Physically, looks like pride's the only broken bone. Karen finally found the door handle. She stumbled out in 4-inch snow boots and a cream wool coat, now dusted white like a powdered donut. The airbag had left a perfect red welt across her throat. My car is destroyed, she shrieked, voice cracking across the frozen air. You destroyed it, I said. On private property. With intent. I've got 4 angles. I'll sue you for every cent you have. Go ahead, I smiled. Discovery's gonna be fun. Especially the part where we subpoena your GPS data and browser history for how to knock over a snowman with an SUV. A ripple of laughter rolled through the growing crowd. That was when the sirens finally arrived, a single cruiser sliding to a careful stop, lights painting the snow red and blue. Officer Ramirez stepped out, took one look at the scene, and actually removed his sunglasses despite the glare. Somebody want to explain why there's a luxury tank in a front yard and a snowman that looks smug about it? Karen lunged forward, pointing a trembling finger at Sarge. He rigged it. Metal rebar. It's a weapon. Ramirez raised an eyebrow at me. Snowman's on my property, officer. Built over a tree stump I've had marked for 3 years. She decided to take the scenic route through my lawn at speed. Ramirez looked at Sarge, then at the crumpled navigator, then at the phone cameras, now numbering in the dozens. Ma'am, he said to Karen, you got a driver's license and a really good explanation. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. The only sound was the soft hiss of steam from her ruined engine and the occasional ping of cooling metal. Jack chose that moment to step forward, boots crunching, and delivered the line of the century in a voice clear enough to carry 3 houses down. That's what happens when you mess with Commander Sarge, lady. The entire block lost it. Someone started chanting Sarge is Sarge, and within seconds, half the neighborhood had joined in fists, pumping in the air like we'd just won the Super Bowl. Karen's face cycled through every shade of red known to science. Officer Ramirez pinched the bridge of his nose, fighting a grin, and finally just shook his head. All right, folks, let's get statements, tow trucks, and maybe some cocoa before we all freeze solid. He looked at me. You pressing charges? I glanced at Jack, eyes shining brighter than the sun on snow, then at Sarge standing proud with his new battle scar, then at the growing crowd of neighbors who suddenly weren't afraid anymore. Nah, I said. Insurance adjusters can fight this one. But I'll take a police report for my records. Karen made a sound like a tea kettle about to explode. The tow truck arrived 20 minutes later, big flatbed chains rattling, driver grinning ear to ear the second he saw the scene. He took one look at Sarge and let out a low whistle. Hell of a snowman, brother. Jack beamed. Commander Sarge, sir, accepts your salute. The driver actually saluted. As the winch pulled the ruined navigator up onto the bed metal, screaming in protest, Karen stood on the sidewalk in 4-inch heels, sinking into snow coat, unbuttoned hair escaping its perfect bun in frantic wisps. She looked small. For the first time in 5 years, Karen Stapleton looked small. And somewhere in the back of the crowd, phones still rolling, a new Maple Ridge legend was born. The frost giant had won, and the war against all odds was finally over. By late afternoon, the storm had fully surrendered, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt sacred. The sky was the color of a robin's egg scrubbed clean, and every surface glittered like the world had been dipped in crushed diamonds. The tow truck was long gone, taking Karen's crumpled navigator with it, metal still ticking, as it cooled pieces of bumper and grill left behind in the snow like battlefield debris. Sarge stood exactly where he had that morning, only now he wore his wound proudly, a perfect circular dent in the satellite dish chest plate edges curled inward like a shield that had caught an arrow and laughed. One scarf was missing, blown clear into the Nguyen's yard, where their kids were already using it as a superhero cape, but the other whipped in the light breeze like a victory banner. Someone had tied a tiny American flag to his coat hanger arm. Someone else had stuck a toy plastic medal on his chest. The plywood shield now read in fresh red marker added by persons unknown. Undefeated, 1 SUV 0 Karma. Jack refused to come inside. He stood guard in full winter gear, cheeks windburned, directing an ever-growing parade of neighborhood kids who wanted to touch the dent, take selfies, or simply stand in the presence of the frost giant who had eaten a Lincoln Navigator for breakfast and asked for seconds. I let him have it. Some moments are bigger than frostbite. By 4 o'clock, the street looked like a block party nobody had planned. Someone fired up a gas grill and started handing out hot dogs. Mrs. Delgado brought a thermos of spiced cider that definitely had rum in it. Mr. Elkins, tomato plant hero, arrived with a folding chair and a grin wider than I'd ever seen, declaring he was retiring his tape measure in Sarge's honor. The Nguyens set up a phone on a tripod and live-streamed the whole thing to the community Facebook group under the title, "The Day the Snowman Won." Rosa texted me at 4:17 p.m. Emergency board meeting just got canceled. 3 members refused to show. Karen tried to convene it from her kitchen. Nobody came. Also, the video is at 87K views and climbing. You officially broke the internet, James. Proud of you. I read it twice, then handed the phone to Jack so he could see the little red heart. He looked up at me with something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite tears. "Does this mean we won, Dad?" I ruffled his frozen hair. "Means we're not done yet, buddy. Winning isn't the end. It's the beginning of building something better." He nodded slowly the way kids do when they feel the weight of a truth too big for words. At 5:03 p.m., she appeared. No SUV this time. Just Karen on foot, trudging down the sidewalk in the same cream wool coat, now streaked with salt stains, and one mysterious grease smear across the lapel. Her hair had surrendered to the wind. Loose strands whipped across her face like she'd lost a fight with a leaf blower. She carried no clipboard, no measuring tape, no printed violation notice. Just her pride, battered and leaking. The crowd noise dropped to a murmur as she stopped at the edge of my lawn boots, sinking ankle deep. Every phone swung toward her like paparazzi spotting a fallen star. She looked at Sarge, really looked for the first time since the crash. Her eyes traced the dent, the missing scarf, the tiny flag fluttering from his arm. Something flickered across her face that might have been recognition, or maybe the first honest emotion she'd allowed herself in years. Then she looked at me. "I came to speak civilly," she said, voice thin enough to snap in the cold. I stepped forward, hands in my pockets, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. "I'm listening." She glanced at the crowd, at the phones, at Jack standing protectively in front of Sarge like a 10-year-old Secret Service agent. "I didn't think it would end like this." "You didn't think at all," I said, not unkindly. "You measured. You circled. You decided a snowman was a declaration of war. And then you drove straight into it." Her lips pressed into a bloodless line. "If you'll remove the footage from the HOA record," she said barely above a whisper, "I'll withdraw the complaint I filed this morning." Jack actually laughed out loud. A sharp, bright bark that made half the crowd chuckle with him. I tilted my head. "You filed a complaint after you totaled your own car on my lawn. I had to protect the association." From what, Karen? From joy. From kids laughing. From a dad and his son refusing to let you bully them one more winter. She flinched like I'd slapped her. I took one step closer. "You had 5 years to choose kindness. 5 years to knock on my door and say, 'Hey, James, tough break, about Clara, anything I can do?' 5 years to treat Mr. Elkins like a neighbor instead of a zoning violation. You chose control instead. And now you're standing in the wreckage of your own choices, asking me for mercy." I let that settle. "I'm not giving you mercy, Karen. I'm giving you the same thing you always gave everyone else, consequences." She stared at me for a long moment. The wind picked up, tugging at her coat, whipping loose snow into tiny tornadoes around her ankles. "This will go public," she said, finally, voice cracking. I smiled, slow and genuine. "I'm counting on it." She turned, then boots crunching, and walked away without another word. No dramatic exit, no final threat. Just the slow, defeated retreat of a queen who had finally met a castle she couldn't starve into submission. Behind me, the crowd erupted cheers whistles. Someone actually set off a leftover 4th of July smoke bomb that painted the sky purple. Jack looked up at me, eyes shining. "She's gone, Dad. She's really gone." I pulled him into a hug so tight his boots left the ground. "Not gone," I whispered into his frozen hair. "Just human for the first time in years." That night, I added 3 new items to the red folder. 1. Still photos from all 4 cameras, timestamped. 2. The police report number Officer Ramirez handed me with a grin and a quiet, "Good luck, Mr. Carter." 3. A single screenshot. Rosa forwarded Karen's emergency email to the board titled, "Urgent, Hostile Resident Endangering Community." The reply all chain was a beautiful thing. 3 members had simply responded with the snowman emoji. One had attached the crash GIF that was already circulating. I hole-punched everything, slid it into the folder, and closed the drawer. Then I poured 2 mugs of cocoa extra whipped cream for victory, and Jack and I sat on the front porch watching the stars come out one by one over a neighborhood that suddenly felt bigger than it had in years. Sarge stood watch in the yard, dented, scarred, and utterly undefeated. And for the first time since Clara's funeral, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like peace. The kind you earn. The kind that lasts. 2 days after the crash, the Maple Ridge HOA sent its last official email of the Karen era. Subject official HOA inquiry. Incident on December 14th. It was written in the same stiff, passive-aggressive prose she had perfected, but the signature line now read, HOA Board, Secretary Acting, because Karen's name had been quietly removed from the letterhead overnight. I read it aloud to Jack over breakfast, while he added extra marshmallows to his cocoa, until it looked like a tiny snowman massacre. They want the footage, I told him. All of it. For review and archive. Jack snorted. They want to watch her lose in 4K. Pretty much. I typed back a reply that took me less than 30 seconds. Dear Board, happy to provide every frame, time-stamped, multi-angle, full audio. I will present it in person at the next open meeting on the record with public viewing. Please confirm date and time. Regards, James Carter, the guy whose snowman is apparently bulletproof. Rosa texted me 10 minutes later with nothing but a popcorn emoji and the words, see you at the clubhouse. The emergency review meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Word traveled faster than the plow trucks. By Monday night, the clubhouse parking lot looked like the morning of a championship game. People brought lawn chairs, thermoses, and at least one person showed up with an actual bucket of popcorn. I walked in wearing the same flannel shirt I'd worn to the first showdown, Jack at my side, in his now legendary Team Sarge hoodie. Rosa met us at the door and handed me a USB drive already loaded with every clip labeled in Sharpie the Snowman Incident, Director's Cut. The board table looked different. Karen's usual throne was empty. Rosa sat center now, flanked by Howard and 2 newer members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Karen herself sat 3 seats down, winter white blazer replaced by a plain gray sweater, eyes fixed on the table like it might open and swallow her. I plugged in the drive. The projector woke up with a cheerful chirp. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, for those who haven't seen the internet's favorite holiday movie yet, I hit play. 4 angles, perfectly synced. The room went dead quiet, except for the low growl of the navigator's engine and the wind howling like a Greek chorus. When the moment of impact hit that glorious earth-shaking boom, half the audience actually jumped. Someone in the back yelled touchdown, and the laughter that followed was the kind that heals old wounds. When the final clip ended on Karen's stunned face and Jack's perfect line, "That's what happens when you mess with Commander Sarge, lady," the applause was loud enough to rattle the windows. Rosa cleared her throat. Any discussion? Howard raised a trembling hand. Motion to open immediate ethics review on former President Stapleton and suspend all pending fines related to seasonal decorations, effective now. Seconded, 3 voices said in unison. Karen stood so fast her chair rolled backward and crashed into the wall. "This is a lynching," she shouted. "He built a weapon." Rosa's voice was calm steel. "He built a snowman, Karen. You weaponized a luxury SUV. Sit down." The vote was unanimous. Karen Stapleton was removed from the board effective immediately. No appeal. No severance package of cupcakes. She walked out without another word. The door closed behind her with the gentle finality of a coffin lid. The room erupted again. Someone started a slow chant of Sarge a Sarge that rolled through the walls and out into the parking lot. Rosa found me afterward in the hallway, Jack half asleep on my shoulder. "5 neighbors already asked if you'd run for president," she said quietly. "Including Mr. Elkins. He says his tomatoes vote for you." I looked down at Jack at the hoodie that now had a tiny dent-shaped patch sewn over the heart by Eli's mom, at the exhaustion and triumph warring on his face. "Tell them yes," I said. January's special election was the quietest revolution Maple Ridge had ever seen. No speeches, no flyers, just a single line on the ballot. James Carter, transparency, common sense. Snowmen welcome. I won in a landslide that would have embarrassed most dictators. Karen sold her house in February. No open house, no goodbye potluck. Just a discreet for sale sign, and a moving truck that came and went in a single gray morning. Rumor was she moved to a gated golf community 3 towns over with CC&Rs so strict you needed board approval to change your toothbrush color. I wished her no ill. Some people only feel safe inside smaller cages. The first thing the new board did was rewrite the seasonal decor policy in one sentence. If it makes a kid smile and doesn't block a fire hydrant, it's approved. We kept the important stuff, snow removal, streetlights, community watch, but every fine now required 3 signatures and a public appeal process. Meetings opened with public comment and closed with cookies. Actual cookies baked by Mrs. Delgado and spiked with enough rum to make Howard tell war stories about Vietnam. And every December, since the first Saturday after the first big snow, the entire neighborhood gathers in my front yard. Now officially designated Sarge Square by unanimous vote to build the biggest community snowman Maple Ridge has ever seen. We don't hide the rebar anymore. We celebrate it. Kids bring their parents old hubcaps, license plates, even a busted mailbox once. We weld, we bolt, we laugh until our lungs freeze. Someone always brings a new banana for the nose. Someone always adds a new medal to the ever-growing collection on his chest. We call the new one Commander Sarge 2, 3, or 4. The number changes every year. Jack is 15 now, taller than me, voice cracking like thin ice, learning to drive on the same streets where his frost giant once stopped a Lincoln Navigator cold. He still insists on drilling the first piece of rebar himself. And every year, when the sun sets and the streetlights flicker on, we step back and look at what we built together. Not just a snowman, but a promise. That joy is bigger than fear. That rules should protect people, not cage them. That sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand perfectly still and refuse to fall. Last night, February's final snow fell soft and quiet, while Jack and I stood on the porch wrapped in the same blanket Clara knitted 15 years ago. He looked at the newest Commander Sarge, 12 feet tall this year, wearing a cape made from last year's Christmas lights, and asked the question he asks every winter. "Think we'll need the armor again, Dad?" I pulled him close, felt the solid weight of the boy who used to fit in my arms like a football, and now almost matches me inch for inch. "I don't think so, buddy," I said, "but we'll keep it ready, just in case." He nodded the way he does when he understands something deeper than words, because some winters are cold, some people are mean, some rules are made to be broken by laughter and banana noses, and 10-year-olds who refuse to let the world shrink. But as long as there's snow and kids and stubborn old oaks that survive lightning strikes, there will be frost giants standing watch. And somewhere 3 towns over, in a perfect gated kingdom of identical mailboxes and pre-approved paint swatches, a woman who once ruled by fear now measures her grass with a ruler and triple checks her curb appeal every morning. She never waves at snowmen anymore. She knows better. Because every December when the first flakes fall and the neighborhood gathers in Sarge Square, we remember. Some things are built to melt. Others are built to last. And the ones that stand tallest are the ones built out of joy and steel, and the quiet, unbreakable promise that no one gets to tell a kid his world has to be small. Commander Sarge still wears his original dent like a purple heart, and every year, when the new one rises beside him, Jack salutes them both, just like I taught him, just like Clara would have wanted. End of story. Or maybe in the best way, just the beginning.